Normally, when you think of forces in society that make changes to, change governments, form new ideologies, make new changes that drive society in a specific direction, normally you'd think of political figures or political movements or organizations, things that move society and the conversations in different directions. You might think of George Washington or Vladimir Lenin. You might think of the founding fathers or the communists at the time. But I don't think those are the most powerful forces that actually change how things operate. My personal belief is the most powerful force and what really determines where your society goes is the trauma your society picks up by what your struggles are at the time. The United States and the Soviet Union, I think we all can agree, are very different countries. They have very different ways of how they ended up going about things. They have very different lifespans. They have very different fundamental principles upon how they operated. But, they had very similar beginnings. They were both farmer societies. They were both under a king. A lot of them were peasants or overly taxed or had all their resources drained by the monarchs. And a lot of them wanted a change. And, when you look at the two different societies with the Americans and the Soviets, or the Russians at the time, the Americans ended up going towards democracy. They had a growing frustration with the limits on representation or expression. They had economic hardship, and they lacked autonomy to follow their own laws. And then you end up going to the Soviet Union, who ended up going communist, and an authoritarian sect of communism. And they had a corruption of the Tsardom. They had deployment of many men who ended up dying in World War I. They had oppression of the peasant and urban classes for generations, and they had the communists coming in and educating these peasants who were frankly just given nothing to live with. And the Americans, their struggles were they wanted representation. They wanted individual liberties, and they wanted autonomy, and they ended up going in their direction. And the Soviets had different struggles. They had a need for new leadership. They wanted liberation from the Tsardom, and many ethnic groups within the Soviet Union wanted their ethnic representation in a strong empire. So, they both at the start got what they wanted. They got their society, they got their new form of government and their ideology. But that outcome, though they started off so similar, was determined by their collective struggles as societies. Now, when you look at different ideologies, there's, prerequisites and conditions for all of these ideologies. Oftentimes for fascism, you need, a growing fear of tradition being under attack, economic hardship, and a desire for a national image to be restored. For communism, you also have the economic hardship, but you also have a growing distrust of ruling classes, and you also have a desire for equality and fair conditions. And similar with communism, liberalism also has a desire for equality and fair conditions, but the conditions of their society aren't bad enough. They don't have the economic hardship where they need to have a distrust of businesses, where they need to have a resent towards the ruling classes of their society. And it's kind of the same thing with conservatism. They have some aspects of fascism with wanting to return to tradition or allowing a natural hierarchy within their society to form, but at the same time, they have stake in the game. They have a decent economy, they're not all in poverty, and they don't need a strong change. They just want a slight move towards a more traditional society. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I personally believe this next election is going to determine where the United States starts to kind of move their future. Because we're kind of at a crossroads here. Because you have the Democratic Party with two more progressive candidates, not liberals, progressive candidates, with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, who are famous for supporting social programs. Kamala Harris was famous for, in the Senate, being outwardly supportive of Medicare for All and for the Green New Deal and for the First Step Act, which gives second chances to prisoners and gives them opportunities to make sure that they don't reoffend. And you have Tim Walz, who's famous for enacting a policy that takes money from the surplus of Minnesota's budget to give their kids and all of their public schools, no matter the income level of their parents, free breakfast and lunches. You have the progressive side, which is fairly new, and you also have the conservative side, which is a lot more conservative than they were in 2016. Under Donald Trump, they want to make more tax cuts. They want more cuts for regulation. They want to drill more oil. They want to give more subsidies and opportunities to big businesses, and they want an emphasis on the border. Now, I believe whichever candidate or whichever ideology that these candidates fall behind looks new and shiny to the people is going to be the one that ends up winning the election. And I personally believe that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are at an advantage right now because of that fact. Because for a while, we did see what Donald Trump and what a conservative presidency under his conservatism would look like. We had building of the wall, we had tax cuts, and, above all, we had a lot more division within our society just from the rhetoric. This is not, I'm not trying to be biased in any sense. This is just what I've noticed. And, the gas prices were down as well. But at the same time, there's a lot of younger voters, and the climate might be an issue to these people. And, drill, drill, drill sounds good to a lot of older people or a lot more conservative people who don't really care much about the environment. But to a growing number of people who want the environment to be fixed or to be taken care of a little bit better, it's not a change to them. And, I think we've seen conservatism. We haven't seen progressivism yet. And that's kind of why I think they're going to win. Now, there's candidates like RFK. There's candidates like, I don't even know, Cornel West or Jill Stein. I really don't think any of them have a shot anyways. They don't really have as much recognition. They don't have as much money to fund anything. But whichever one of these candidates, because we are at a crossroads in this country, it's extremely divided. There is a distrust for our elections, and there is a distrust for the very structure of our system. On both sides, left-wing people distrust the system, and now right-wing people distrust the system, if not equally as much, if not more at this point. I think whichever one can look like a change to the median voter is going to be where the country strives. So this next election, the country is either going to start to go a little bit more to the left, or it's going to be set on its way of going right. And I don't know, I think that's kind of interesting. We're at a situation where I don't believe conservatism is built to necessarily fix the problems that we have right now. There's not much of a trust for corporations. There's not much of a trust for the government. There's not much of a trust in, our structures at all. And I don't think people really rely on the hierarchy anymore when people are talking about a deep state, or when people are talking about how college is a scam. And these are all conservative arguments. So I think the Conservative Party is moving towards something a bit to the right of conservatism, and I believe the left is moving a little bit more to the left of liberalism, just because the conditions are getting a little bit worse. I think this election will be strongly determined by what the American people have seen in the last decade, and what they think will be a genuine change and escape from the two-party system that doesn't serve them and only takes money from donors. So, I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting. But yeah, that's my video. Y'all have a good day.